All right, we are going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Thank you everybody for joining Managing Information Governance with Microsoft and Gimmal. We appreciate you joining us today. And the first thing I just want to do is introduce our speakers. My name is Shana Horka and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal. And I'm joined by our key speaker today, Gimmal's Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Misenhimer. And before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen, and we're going to answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up in a separate screen. All answers are anonymous, so please keep an eye out for that. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. To get started, I have just a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information. Gimmal is an information governance software company founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft, which we'll be talking about today, and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration from legacy systems, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, and document management for SAP content. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Dean. He's going to go into these a little bit more in depth.
Thank you, Shana. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're going to talk a little bit just about the Microsoft 365 platform and content services, and really take into consideration some of the things that you'll need to really look at as you deploy that platform to have kind of what you would call a whole business solution, so to speak. But to start that, we're actually going to go back in time and look at a little history lesson of kind of how we got where we're at today with content services platforms. If you've been in and around document management, around IT, for any length of time, in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, document management systems, imaging solutions, a lot of kind of scan and retrieve, scanning paper documents, putting some metadata in a database and being able to search and retrieve those documents, basic, kind of version control, workflow systems. Those were the solutions that were out there. And they were typically standalone systems, a few kind of desktop client applications that were used to access those. And they were, kind of designed for a specific purpose. And then in the 1990s, along came Netscape, and they introduced the browser. And suddenly everything changed, because now people wanted to start using browser-based access. They no longer wanted to use thick clients on the desktop, right? And document management systems started to appear that were web-based, that ran inside the browser. OpenText was one of the early adopters there, right? And that really began to change the landscape of how these systems were deployed. Things like three-tier architecture showed up. I mean, we're going back a few years. And then going into the 2000s, well, as a result of the browser-based systems and the advent of the web and companies rolling out, large-scale websites and things like that, other technologies began to appear, like web content management, digital asset management, records management systems, who had been around back in the document management days, but were more now web-based and began to appear. And so you started to have all these disparate technologies that had developed over the years begin to come together in what were referred to as enterprise content management platforms, or ECM. And sometimes those were organic growth. Sometimes it was a result of new technology that came into the market. Sometimes it was a combination of organic development as well as acquisition. There was a lot of market consolidation that began to happen from that point forward. And that kind of got us to where we're at today with content services platforms. Content services is a term Gartner kind of developed a couple of years back, which is really the next step of ECM, where instead of ECM was a platform, but it was still a platform you built applications on top of, driven around content management. Content services becomes more of a service layer and opens those services up to other applications across the organization as well. Right, so it's been a bit of a journey to get where we're at today, and fortunately or unfortunately, I've been part of a lot of this journey. And that gets us to today, where a lot of the content services platforms, if not most of the content services platform, have now moved to the cloud. Right, more and more organizations want to move as many payloads as possible to the cloud. And so cloud content services is really becoming the foundation for a lot of organizations, because that allows them to provide a variety of services across the organization, from content management, collaboration, process management, sharing of content. You get broad access. Right, with early document management, there was a thick Windows desktop client that you had to use. Then it all moved to the browser, but you were still had to have the browser to get to the system. Now with cloud-based content services, I can get to that information from not just the browser on my desktop, but from a mobile browser or mobile apps. Right, my access to information has broadened out, and cloud content services really do become a platform with a common set of services that I can tie multiple applications into and leverage that as the common platform. And that's where Microsoft 365 has really established a strong foothold, is as a SaaS solution that gives me that breadth of services for, think of all the things you may use it for. You might just use it for Office every day. You might use it for SharePoint and OneDrive. You certainly, I'm willing to bet, use it for email. Right? But there's a lot of other services within the platform that are available as well. And I think, to me, one of the unique things about the Microsoft 365 platform is it is one of the very few platforms that I've seen in my career that has the ability to touch every single desktop in an organization, whether you're 100 people or 10,000 people. It has that reach out into the organization. And the reason why is, simplified may not be the best word, but it's one platform with all of this technology, all of these services available: content creation, collaboration, multimedia management with Stream and other things, process management with the Power apps. There's just such a broad variety of services. If you ever click on the little hamburger in the upper left of your Microsoft 365 environment, just see all the services that are available to you. And it's not just Microsoft 365, because the platform can also then bring, as I mentioned, the Power Platform with Power Automate, Power Apps, Azure in with things like Azure Active Directory and other Azure, Azure Storage and other Azure capabilities. This all becomes a common platform that can underpin your IT infrastructure. And it lowers the total cost of ownership, right? You've now got a cloud-based solution. So, it's a subscription model. Your software maintenance costs are lower. You don't have the hardware to maintain. You've got technology that has a large base of expertise in the market. So your staffing becomes easier, right? You don't need proprietary skill sets that a lot of the ECM platforms force you to adopt. And it's a familiar stack, right? The usability in your user training becomes much easier as well, right? Because people are familiar with Office. Somebody comes into your organization brand new, they've probably used Word before, right? So it makes it much, much easier. And so as a result of that, you roll out Microsoft 365, you're done, right? You can go to lunch. Don't have to worry about anything else. Well, not exactly. And that's really the meat of the webinar today, which is, as you look to roll out a content services platform like Microsoft 365, especially if your organization has a legacy of using ECM platforms, whether it's OpenText or Documentum or IBM FileNet or others, right? How do you ensure that even though you have this powerful platform, you're going to have the same level of capability going forward across the enterprise that you have when you retire a legacy ECM solution, right? And that's really the key, is to ensure that you have all of the services you need to be able to have kind of, comparable functionality. And so you have to begin to take into consideration things like, if you've been using a legacy ECM system for the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, or with some organizations, how much content is in there? How are you going to migrate that content into Microsoft 365, right? It's not just a simple lift and shift operation, right? There's work to be done there, and we'll talk about that. If your company runs their business around SAP, right? Is SAP integrated into your legacy ECM? How do you begin to leverage Microsoft 365 as your content management platform for SAP? And we'll talk about that. Information governance, right? Microsoft 365 has some good governance tools built in, but are they enough? Are they going to give you the visibility going forward as, quite frankly, your users begin to adopt Microsoft 365 and use it, to have the visibility that you need to analyze email and OneDrive, look for PST files that they may be creating outside of Microsoft 365, right? How do you have that information governance visibility? And then from a compliance standpoint, right, what do you need from a records management standpoint? Do you need in-depth records management capability? Are you in a regulated industry, right? What are your requirements for records? And do you still have paper records, right? Paper hasn't gone away. The paperless office has been talked about for a very long time, and it's still not here because we all still have paper records that we need to deal with. And the idea is Gimmal, combined with Microsoft 365, can give you the solutions to have, to be able to support your business processes across the organization. Whether you're in compliance and you're concerned about records management, defensible disposition, and audits and discovery requests, right? Gimmal can help extend what Microsoft 365 can do there. If you're in IT and you're worried about things like SAP archiving and managing content from SAP, if you're in operations and you're using SAP, or you are involved in the day-to-day business, and trying just quite frankly to get your job done, Gimmal can help support that, right? And so the combination can give you the business solution that you need to kind of have that equivalent capability. So let's go through each one of these in a little bit of detail. Let's start with migration, because that's step one, right? How do we get all of that legacy content into Microsoft 365? Well, Microsoft provides some migration tools, right? There's a migration manager built into Microsoft 365 that can handle migration from some content sources like a file system or some cloud-based file storage systems, but it's not a migration tool that can do what I would call full fidelity migrations, bring in metadata, do the analysis that you need. Because step one of any good migration is going to be take a step back before you just start moving stuff and discover and analyze what it is you have. Take inventory and understand, what do I need to migrate? How much content do I have? If I have 5 terabytes of content sitting in Content Server or sitting in a Documentum DocBase, how long is it going to take to migrate that information? Do I move it all? Do I take every version of every document Maybe not. Maybe I just cut off and I only take the last 5 versions of each document, or only versions that are less than a year old, right? What about metadata and folders? What type of metadata do I have? How many depths of folders do I have? Do I need to kind of remap how some of that information is set up and organized, right? Because I do have the ability to do that as well. And then, are there differences between my source system, my content server environment, my Documentum environment, and my SharePoint Online environment? So for example, do I have extremely long path names in my legacy system that won't migrate over? Right? There's a 400 character limit in SharePoint Online, and there's a 200, I believe it's 218 characters in SharePoint on-premise. Right? Legacy systems exceeded that in a lot of cases. So how do I map those over? How do I identify those to make sure I know they're there before I try and map them? What about things like links and shortcuts? Or some of the more complex data structures like compound or virtual documents? How do I deal with those? Right? So that's the kind of analysis you need to do. And then you can begin doing your migration. But when you do your migration, quite frankly, keep it simple. Don't try and boil the ocean and do it all at once. Break it into manageable chunks, right? Do it by department, or do it by work group, or whatever makes sense, or by workspace, or do it whatever way makes sense, and set realistic expectations on the timing. Migration can take a while, right? Because the content may still be in use from a business standpoint. So you can't just necessarily disrupt the business for a full week. You might need to do migration over a course of weekends, right? And communicate with your end users about what's going to be happening, and involve them in the validation and the user acceptance, because often those are your subject matter experts on what the data is and what the metadata should be and how that data gets used. They're the ones who use it day to day in the business. Involve them in the user acceptance work and the validation, and be able to ensure that as you do a migration, you maintain a chain of custody and you manage the process, right? The process is the key. Technology is an enabler, but the process is the key to migration. Right? And that's where Gimmal Migrate comes in. There's a lot of capabilities. I won't go through these in detail today. We've got a lot of good webinars out there we've done on Migrate. But it's a client-facing tool, a desktop tool that lets you do all of that metadata mapping, that analysis, that restructuring, so you can easily move information from legacy ECM into Microsoft 365. Now, for those of you who are SAP shops, right? If your company uses SAP, SAP is running your business. It's your system of record, right? It kind of drives most of the business processes. Now, you may still be on ECC. You may have moved to SAP HANA, or you may be in that process in between, right? And have plans to move to HANA. But chances are, if you've been using SAP for a while, you are either archiving content out of the SAP database, or if you're moving to HANA, you better have a plan to do it, because the SAP database is not a place to store documents. It's a transactional system, right? And SAP has built-in capabilities to enable effective SAP archiving and content management underneath, right? And traditionally, that had been the domain of companies like OpenText and FileNet, Documentum, and others. Those ECM platforms had strong SAP archiving capabilities. Well, if you've now made the investment in Microsoft 365, and Microsoft 365 is your strategic platform for the future, right? That's where all your content services are. It's cloud and it's mobile ready, right? It gives you all of those things you need. Why wouldn't you use it as your content management platform to underlie SAP, the same way you used to use the legacy systems? So that now, whether you're on SAP HANA, or whether you're using Fiori-based apps, or just kind of old school and using SAP GUI, right? Gimmal can enable Microsoft 365 and SharePoint Online as that underlying content repository for SAP. Gimmal Link gives you the ability to store SAP content in Microsoft 365 so that if I'm an SAP user and I add documents to a maintenance work order in SAP or to a human resources file or to I upload invoices to a purchase order in SAP, well, as an SAP user, nothing changes for me. I'm still working through my SAP interface. In the background, Gimmal Link takes those documents, actually stores them in the SharePoint repository, but maintains that link back to the transaction in SAP and populates all my metadata for me. So what it does is it brings together the SAP world and the Microsoft 365 world so the same users can interact and work with the same content, be part of the same business processes, and my SharePoint users have the ability to upload content and add information to SharePoint, and that content will be seamlessly linked back to the SAP transaction as well. So maybe I author a new standard operating procedure on maintenance on a piece of equipment. I upload that to SharePoint, put in the right pieces of metadata, and now that standard operating procedure is automatically available to my maintenance worker out in the field through their SAP interface, right? It can bring that together, protect your value and your investment in both strategic platforms, help drive the user adoption because nothing changes for your SharePoint users or for your SAP users. And it allows you to optimize your investment because now, again, it gives you another avenue to retire legacy ECM systems and save that cost. And then information governance, which can be a broad term, but we're going to talk about it a little bit just in having visibility into information and being able to identify information that might be sensitive or critical information. Right? There's a lot of information that will be stored in your SharePoint Online environment, but not everything may be a record, but you still want to know what's out there. You still may want to know what contains sensitive data. If you're going to be doing migrations of not just legacy ECM, but maybe file share content or other locations into SharePoint Online, you might need to do some ROT analysis first before you migrate it, so you're not migrating. It's kind of like moving houses, right? Are you going to migrate your junk closet from one house to another one, or are you going to clean it out first before you pack it? Same concept. And so Gimmal Discover gives us the ability to do file analytics. It's a SaaS-based platform, so sits alongside your Microsoft 365 environment cleanly. Agents simply connect to the various services of Microsoft 365. And so, as we talked about earlier, Microsoft 365 has some governance capabilities, right? E-discovery and sensitivity labels, for example. But Discover can extend that, right? And start to do combinations of things like age-based analysis with term-based and expression analysis, or combine that with pattern matching. So I'm only concerned with documents that are in SharePoint sites that are over 3 years old that may contain a pattern that looks like a social security number and contain an expression that looks like a person's name, right? You can begin to build those types of analytics on your SharePoint content, especially as you drive adoption of the Microsoft platform, as more users come online and begin using the platform and putting information out there. Right? You can continue to maintain visibility into what's out there. And again, if you have, as you're deploying the solution, if you're looking to migrate not just legacy ECM, but let's say file share content, right? You can just ship a drive to Microsoft and they'll upload it all for you, or you can use their migration tool and they'll just bring it all, it'll bring it all in for you, and that's great. But again, do you want to do a level of analysis before you bring that information in and understand what it is? Do you want to remediate rot and get rid of it and move it out? And as your users are putting information into SharePoint Online, for example, do you want to analyze that information, and information that might be sensitive? Do you want to move it to a specific location so it might fall under records management capability? Because context on your information matters. Metadata is helpful, right? Metadata tells me a lot. Location tells me a lot, but I want to know if my content is high value or low value, because I may want to manage it differently depending on if it's high value or low value content. Is it rot? Can I get rid of it? How long do I need to keep it? Maybe I just put retention on some things, but other things need more formal records management, right? And I need to get it someplace where it can fall under records management control. And so that kind of takes us to our last section here, records management. Again, Microsoft 365 provides some records management capabilities, right, with retention labels. And you can do kind of basic retention and records management with that. But do you need more? And that's part of the analysis you need to do and need to look at, especially again, if you're coming from a solution that had, robust records management capabilities, you need to have those equivalent capabilities in Microsoft 365. And that's where tools like Gimmal Records and Gimmal Physical can be brought to the table to extend the capabilities that you have. What does your retention schedule look like? Is it a relatively simple schedule, or is it complex with, hundreds of record classes and nested down multiple levels with a deep structure to it? Do you have electronic records and physical records? Because if you have paper records, how are you going to manage those under the same file plan? What do you do with your records, right? Are all of your records going to be in SharePoint Online? Ideally, the answer would probably be yes, but realistically, that may not be true. So how do you manage records that aren't in SharePoint Online? Because there may still be records out on your file shares that just need to stay there. Or it may take, kind of going back to the migration discussion, it may take an extended period of time to migrate off your legacy ECM, or there may be some content that's so ingrained in a critical business process, you can't migrate that content. And so how do you put records policy on that? Right, and so that's where in-place records management can come into play with Gimmal Records, right? The records can be managed from a common retention schedule and file plan, but be managed where they're at rest, whether they are in SharePoint Online or whether they might be someplace else, or if you have your paper records out there, right? And then what does your information architecture look like, right? Can you manage everything off relatively straightforward date fields, or do you need to do more complex multi-phase retention? Do you have other types of data you need to take into consideration for how you drive the retention? And so Gimmal Records and Gimmal Physical are going to allow your team to manage policies and deploy them across the organization. And as a records manager, give me a single view of all of my records, regardless of where they're at, and allow me to manage the disposition of those records in a very simple fashion, right? One tool to manage all records. The ease of use, Gimmal Records was designed for, and Gimmal Physical both, designed for records managers. So it has a look and a feel and an ease of use to it that's not an IT-oriented interface. It's a records management-oriented interface. And all of my records now fall under a single point of control, regardless of where those records may be. And I have one place I can go to generate reports, to manage my disposition process, right? I can see everything from a common viewpoint. And so, Gimmal, whether I have documents, emails, boxes, files, I can get them all under control with Gimmal Records and Gimmal Physical. Okay, I can manage all of my records across the organization that are in Microsoft 365 plus more. If you have physical records, especially, some of our clients still have high volumes of physical records. And again, going back to the migration discussion, a lot of times the thought process is, well, we'll just scan all the paper. But when you start adding up the number of boxes, the number of files, the number of pages, that's a very laborious process. And even with high-speed scanning solutions that are out there, there's a cost and there's an amount of time that comes into play. So you may have paper records for a while and you may be generating more. So if you're managing your own locations, do you need the warehouse and the space management that's out there to track how much space is being used, how much space is available? Use barcode scanning or RFID to track the movement of your physical records so they don't get lost, right? And then have complex retention, right? Multi-year, multi-stage retention life cycles, manage transfers, be able to manage vital records, permanent records, all of those different nuances that may come into play, and have a formal disposition approval process, right? That can apply to my records, whether my records are physical, whether they're in SharePoint Online or whether they're somewhere else. It's a common disposition process, right? So at the end of the day, Microsoft 365 is that platform for your content services. And it's the platform that, organizations, if you look at the adoption of Microsoft 365, it's been phenomenal. There are, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or millions of users, being added annually. The technology is there. The total cost of ownership is there. That's proven. But combining Microsoft 365 with Gimmal gives you the ability then to support all of the business processes you need to wrap around Microsoft 365, from content migration to get the information in, your SAP content management, information governance tools to extend the core capabilities of what the Microsoft 365 platform offers and give you additional flexibility, and to deliver full feature records management capabilities across all of the content sources that you might have out there. So got a quick poll here that'll pop up on your screen. Would you like to gain more information about Gimmal solutions? Click yes, and then we'd be happy to set up a demo or discussion around any of the products that I've talked about today, whether it's Migrate, SAP, information governance, records, even if it's just physical or just electronic, right? We'd be happy to have a discussion with you around any of those things and go into more depth. This was kind of an overview of how they can all work.
And Dean, I'll go ahead, and there are a couple of questions. Just be respectful of time while people are polling. I'm just going to go ahead and ask a couple before we jump. So the first one is, why can't I do all of this in Microsoft 365 or with the Microsoft tools?
It's part of kind of what we talked about a little bit. Part of it is the capabilities Microsoft offers around information governance, around compliance, provide basic capabilities. And for some organizations, might be enough. But what we have seen is, for a lot of organizations, it's not enough from a record standpoint or from a file analytics standpoint, or especially, if you do need to do those large scale migrations, or you are an SAP client, those are not tool sets that are going to be robust enough out of the box or exist out of the box. You would either have to develop custom tools on your own, which gets you in the software business, or look to a third party like Gimmal.
Okay, and then this next one I have is kind of similar to that. What's the difference between your tool and Microsoft Search and eDiscovery? Isn't that all I need?
Yeah, the Gimmal file analytics tool gives you, I would say, kind of broader capabilities for building, custom searches. If you need to combine things like pattern-based searches, so I need to find Social Security number or tax ID numbers along with other information, or I need to do, I need kind of reports to come back and show me a list of everything that was found so that I can take remediation actions. Those are some of the kind of things our file analytics tool does. Our eDiscovery tool makes it easy not just to run discovery searches in Microsoft 365, but also across other content sources. Because a lot of our clients, Microsoft 365 is their core platform, but either other projects have sprung up in the company that use other tools, other file sharing tools, or may use, other personal tools, and they need a way to run analytics or be able to run e-discovery searches across all of those, generate collections, be able to easily provide those out. So the tools that Gimmal provides are really oriented towards the people that need to do those types of searches and collections and things like that. I think part of it's just usability and breadth of the content sources that can be addressed.
Great. And that wraps up our Q&A. If you have any other questions, Dean's email, and both Dean and myself, our emails are on there on the screen. Feel free to email us, or if that's too hard to remember, info@gimmal.com will also get to one of us and we'll get those answered. For those interested in a recording of this webinar, we do a webinar roughly every week. We put all of our recordings on our website for future reference, but you will be receiving a recording of this webinar in the form of a thank you email. So please keep an eye out for that if you do want to watch the archive video. We hope to see you on our next webinar next week, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.